time I was 11 or 12, I was developing, which added a whole other layer of complexity to my experience of sexual trauma. I also experienced a great deal of covert sexual trauma at that point, having men make passes at me when I was 12 or 13, being sort of gawked at and teased. Even the fathers of my boyfriends would make comments and flirt with me and come on to me and things like that.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Flip That Shit. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and my guest today is Alinda Quinn. Let me tell you a little bit about Alinda. Alinda was born in 1968 in Dallas, Texas, to newlywed parents who were barely more than children themselves. Unfortunately, they each had a history of sexual trauma. Growing up in a young family and fighting their own battles with sexual trauma left them with few resources to support healthy parenting. Alinda's needs were neglected from the start. Her father struggled with alcoholism most of his life, and she believes her mother's behaviors were aligned with traits of covert narcissism. After a few years of her birth, her sister was born, followed a few years later by a younger brother. She had plenty of happy childhood memories, but the unhappy ones have always been dark and smothering. To her knowledge, her earliest sexual trauma occurred when she was around 6 years old and her baby sister was only 3. They were abused by an uncle by marriage. Even at 6, she knew that telling someone about this would disturb the family infrastructure and that would be held as secured secrets that contain lies, half-truths, justifications, gaslighting, family myths, and broken bits of a false narrative. Thus, the grooming behaviors of some beloved family members and the chaos and neglect of her home life defined her early experiences of love, replacing healthy and safe love with bonds created by trauma. It was the only love she knew. Alinda's story is not uncommon, and that's disturbing. It's even more disturbing are today's numbers. Over half of women and 1/3 of men have experienced sexual violence during their lifetimes. When she sat down to do the hard math on herself, the final count of incidents of sexual violence in her life was shocking even to her. The number was 8. 8 sexually motivated physical attacks in 46 years. Alinda has taken this incredible experience and done something amazing with it. She's a Sacred Space Trauma Recovery is the name of her business. She's a private mental health practitioner, and she offers one-to-one personal coaching and mental health education to both survivors and mental health practitioners. Her areas of expertise are, no surprise, child sexual abuse, developmental attachment trauma. Her healing modalities include a variety of things like attachment work, reparenting the self, somatic strategies, and principles of emotional literacy and narrative therapy. She has a strong background in crisis intervention, and she has a BA in psychology and an MA in English. She's received more than 35 postgraduate hours in concentrations of counseling, rhetoric, and gender studies. She has more than 30 years combined mental health services, writing, and teaching. Welcome, Alinda. My goodness gracious. That's a lot to unpack at the beginning of an episode.
It is a lot. It is
so, Alinda, what I'd love to start with is asking you to describe your childhood in 3 words.
3 words. It's a little bit tough to narrow down, but I would say probably chaotic for sure, unpredictable for sure, and frightening.
And how did you navigate these early childhood experiences? You said you knew at 6 years old that it wasn't going to really be well received, or it wasn't really something that was going to be, that safe space was not going to be held for you in that moment, I guess is what I want to say. How did you know that?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm not really sure at 6 how I could have known such a thing. As I've done more work in this field, I've come to realize that children have these amazing abilities. They're just brilliant in terms of being able to find ways to cope and find ways to do workarounds and to stay safe. And so I think that any child in that situation sort of has a sixth sense about these things that becomes developed when you live in that really scary, dangerous place. I think part of it too, my personality was I have always been very introverted. I've always kind of looked inward. I've had a strong spiritual base. So I think that led to a certain level of self-awareness that maybe the typical 6-year-old wouldn't have had, because you have to know yourself and your environment to stay safe when you're living in that.
Do you think your mom knew?
It's a tough one. I have trouble understanding how she couldn't have, just with the dynamics of the family and the stories that I've known and the digging that I've done. I find it very difficult that she wouldn't know. Now, denial plays a role in that, of course. We see what we're willing to see, and I think that plays a role. I don't know if she knew specifically the details, but she knew that the person she was sending me away to spend time with was not a safe person. I know that she...
Right. And so what do you think it was that was going on with her that precluded her from keeping you safe?
I don't think she knew how. I don't think she knew what it meant to be safe. I don't think she understood that that's right, that as human beings, we are born with a right to be seen and heard, loved, protected, because that wasn't her experience, having been sexually abused at a very young age and having an alcoholic mother who didn't protect her. I don't think she knew.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, as I was reading your story, I think it was really important for people to understand this is such a perfect example of intergenerational trauma.
Yes, absolutely. And the more questions I've asked, I realize that more and more.
Yeah. So what kind of questions did you ask that led you to understand that? And how did that change your healing?
Well, asking questions about just family history, who different people were. I have a couple of people in my family in particular who really kept good records and really have a lot of knowledge and stay in touch with the extended family. And these were people who I was able to ask questions to. I did not ask questions about, there's stories that you hear that, as children, or my experience as a child, I would hear these stories that the adults would talk about, but it was in hushed voices and secret. And I didn't dare ask that specific question, but I would ask questions around that question so I could put the pieces together myself. But I would hear stories of different ways that different individuals in our family would abuse the children. And I just knew somehow, I don't know, by the grace of God, somehow I knew how to pose my questions around that and still stay safe and stay under the radar. Because you have to stay under the radar to stay safe.
Now, you and I went through the same trauma recovering coaching program. That's how we know each other. Yes. And I know one of the most profound things I learned at the very, very beginning, and it's not that I didn't know these things. I think that it was just the way it was laid out, just really made it so much more concrete for me, of all the different ways that these experiences are the after effect, which are the trauma. Right? So we always say trauma is never the event. Trauma is the way that the experience is interpreted, and it changes our life with the way that we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. And it can be biological, neurobiological, cognitive, mental, relational, emotional, physical. There's so many different ways these experiences can affect us. So as a child, how did this change you? How did it change the lens through which you saw yourself and others? What was that after effect?
Sadly, I think I was an early bloomer. So within a few years of when the abuse did stop, by the time I was 11 or 12, I was developing, which added a whole other layer of complexity to my experience of sexual trauma. I also experienced a great deal of covert sexual trauma at that point, having men make passes at me when I was 12 or 13, being sort of gawked at and teased. Even the fathers of my boyfriends would make comments and flirt with me and come on to me and things like that. So that sort of became, that just reinforced to me the fact that my body was really for consumption. And I grew up with that idea in my head. By the time I was about 15, I didn't have the language for it, but I recognized that my body and my sexuality was currency in this world. And that became my life experience. And that became a guiding principle of how I entered into relationships and how I felt about myself as a person. And it's really difficult because in some ways, you know, your sexuality, I believe my sexuality is also a very spiritual thing tied to me very intimately in that way. But I also able to kind of compartmentalize, see my body as other and my sexuality as other. And then that's how you tolerate, because as a 6-year-old, you learn to separate from your body in order to survive what's happening to you. And so that skill was helpful through the rest of my life.
So for the people that are listening, because I can't imagine that someone's not listening and says, oh my goodness, like I actually had a similar experience. You know, would you qualify that now that you know what you know, and how much knowledge you have in this area, would you consider the fact that you disassociated from your body because you really didn't have the ability to fight or to flee or to talk your way out of that?
Would I clarify it? I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Like what I'm saying is, you know, we always have these trauma responses we can pull from, right? When we're very, very young, we can't really fight something like that off easily. And we certainly can't flee from it. And we can't talk ourselves out of it, right? Which would be that fun. So what I find so often, either with my clients or with my guests, is that they tend to freeze. And in that moment, they literally just leave their body and kind of disconnect and disassociate. So would you feel that that was your best coping strategy at the moment?
Absolutely, it was. And although as you begin to heal, I think, or as I began to heal, I recognized that wasn't a coping strategy I wanted to continue to use. But at the same time, I recognized that it kept me alive. It was survival. It was the thing that kept me going. And in that way, again, just going back to how brilliant the children are and what a magnificent, beautiful job our nervous system does in keeping us safe. That's the brain's main job, is to keep us safe and keep us functioning. And our brain is there to look out for us. And so Alinda's, brain at that point said, we're going to take little 6-year-old Alinda somewhere else so she can feel safe. And for that, I am very, very grateful. And part of the healing is learning, kind of embracing that gratitude, but recognizing, okay, is this still serving me? Am I still in danger? And what are some tools that I can gather up to better understand what safety looks like now today, as opposed to a little girl.
So what was that journey like for you?
Long, arduous, eye-opening, hopeful. I had to hold on to a lot of hope. There was always a light for me. I'm a creative person, and one of the things that helped with my journey is that I am a writer. I began writing poetry at age 8. And it's kind of interesting because poetry is a way of expression that you don't have to describe the narrative beginning, middle, and end, but you can symbolically use language to express feelings and experiences that are sort of hidden, sort of mysterious, so people don't read it and know the facts. But I could express in that way. The journey was a lonely one for a long time. And then I think one of the really important turning points for me was getting into the coaching program and recognizing that the healing happens in connection. And that's when I began to take risks and reach out and choose people, safe people, and say, this is my story. And I'm trying to heal right now. And I might be a little like not myself for a while. Can I count on you to be a person who I can call when I feel out of control or frightened?
Yeah. And I think that's so important for people to understand. It's almost like re-traumatizing all over, because you're going back and you're refeeling and reprocessing those feelings and finding a better way to deal with them, so they're not holding on to them anymore. So if someone's listening and they go, oh my goodness, this was my story, or somewhat similar, what tips and tricks would you give to them? What did you learn for yourself that someone could take from this, as far as learning how to take the first steps in that healing journey for themselves?
Honestly, for me, with how far I've come and what I've learned about myself, I think the best advice, or the best words of wisdom that I could offer, would be all these things that you're doing and reacting in life that are making you feel crazy. It is the trauma. You're not crazy. They are actually what we call normal reactions to abnormal situations. And trauma reactions, trauma responses are controlled by the nervous system. And sometimes we truly don't control them, and that we just need to extend some grace to ourselves. At the same time, recognize that there's no rescue, there's no savior, there's nothing like that, but that you do have the power to look within and go, okay, this isn't how I want to cope anymore, and to reach out and find someone who specializes in trauma, who can help you cope with those reactions and learn healthier ways, but that they're very normal, and you need to forgive yourself for that.
I think I feel this calling to help people understand what those normal reactions to the abnormal circumstances are, right? Because surprisingly enough, part of the purpose of this is helping people start to connect the dots. Even though you would think it was so in your face, sometimes they can't connect the dots. So I'll give an example. I worked many, many years ago with someone who had severe insomnia. Okay. And it was interesting because this person was actually a licensed therapist, and she had come to me originally for RTT work. Right. And she's given me permission to share this. And originally she came to me, this is really interesting, for lack of motivation. And as we talked a few sessions before this rapid transformational therapy journey we were going to take together, it came out that, in fact, if she slept better, maybe she'd have more motivation and wouldn't procrastinate all the time. And then I said, oh, is sleep an issue for her? So now we've got lack of motivation, procrastination, sleep issues. She goes, yeah, I'm such an insomniac. I have so many issues with sleeping. I even have stuff underneath my bed to help me monitor my sleep. Like, sleep is a real issue. And I said, okay, well, what would it look like if motivation wasn't actually the core problem, that insomnia was the core problem, and that lack of motivation was more of a symptom of that? She goes, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that's what we need to work on. Okay. So as we're working through the insomnia, what comes out is that at night she was being sexually assaulted as a young child by certain family members, and she could sleep no problem during the day. But she had so many things happening in the evenings that was keeping her so hyper vigilant, because her mind, that part of that memory, the one that's stuck in the hippocampus, right, that has no time bound, still felt its job was to keep her safe. Even though she always made good decisions when she was getting her places, she'd be on top floors so nobody could break in. And she always had these fears. She had not connected the dots. And she was well into her 60s, 70s at this point. She had not connected the dots that had been all the way connected back to these experiences, which she thought in her mind she had worked through. So in this particular case, some of these normal reactions to the abnormal experience that were still affecting her decades later were this hypervigilance, this lack of sleep, and then, of course, the lack of motivation and procrastination and poor eating habits and not getting to the gym. All these things were all tied back to these traumas that she had as a young child. So for you, what were some of these normal reactions to this abnormal circumstance? I really want to preface this by saying, in this particular case that I'm thinking of, neither of these particular people I was working with had brought to me, and I had no knowledge of any kind of sexual trauma. It was other kinds of trauma. But in all these cases, the child was very young. They were in a position of powerlessness, and there was no option to flee, and there was no option to fight, and there was no way to talk themselves out of it or to please the person in a way that it would cause the danger to stop. And so in all these cases, they learned to very much disassociate. They did not know that that's what they had done. It wasn't until we were in this RTT journey, they literally kind of almost from an observer role, watched that experience all over again for their younger self and literally saw it happen. Literally saw them leave their self. And they were like, oh my God. Later down, 40, 50 years later, when they're coming to me, here are the after effects of that. I know how to give love. I don't know how to receive it. I do not know how to let it in. I don't feel it in my body. Or in another case, the person had been overweight and had lost a tremendous amount of weight. And she knew she had lost a tremendous amount of weight because she felt it. Her clothes were many, many sizes smaller. She knew cognitively that she was a very different size and shape. But she was so disconnected from her body still 50 years later. She only ever saw herself still as the heavy version of herself. And she could not understand why she wasn't connected to this other part of her. And so we really dug deep into that, and really goes back to something I heard Bessel van der Kolk say once in an interview, which is part of the somatic experience for people when they're healing, and why people do this kind of somatic work is it's this movement of the body. And when you can connect to the body, what he says is you become somebody versus nobody. And what he means by that is that there are many experiences that leave us with no body, meaning we've disconnected so much from self that interbridge is so ruptured. Mm-hmm. This is all about connecting back. So I know that theoretically, I am not somebody that really disconnects. I freeze in different ways, but I don't do it that way. So I've never really been able to speak to it from a personal experience. So I'm wondering if you can share what that experience was like for you, because I think it's really important.
Well, it's hard. I think the crux of it would be that you, at least in my experience, I didn't know I wasn't feeling things. I thought everyone was that way. I thought everyone had this sort of shutdown, although I didn't think of it as a shutdown, but it was in essence a shutdown. For example, and I've talked to my sister, she doesn't mind if I share, like she physically remembers the feelings of the actual abuse. I have like I see it. I don't remember what it felt like. I don't remember what physically much the physical sexual assault upon me physically felt like in my body, because I'm able to leave it. And then just things like with the overeating, I would eat, and there was no, whatever mechanism in you, there's a mechanism that lets you know when you're getting full. I'm sure it works in me, but I have a way of bypassing it. I have a way of ignoring and dissociating. And so things like that, where I would eat and I didn't know until that I was full until I was sick. And then I would eat so much that I would throw up because I didn't know I was full. And I didn't like that feeling of being full. But for me, it was either full or empty. I didn't have any, just as one example, there wasn't like when people without trauma or without dissociation can eat like a snack or something, their body feels different to them. They can feel that, okay, there's some satisfaction in there. I wasn't capable. I never felt that kind of thing. And I just thought that's how it was. It wasn't until I started really looking at things that I figured that out.
You know, I'm so glad that you shared that. And what it's making me think of, I heard you say earlier, you know, I want people to know that that was a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. They're not crazy. You know, these are the things that make somebody feel crazy. What do you mean you feel full? What's wrong with me that I don't feel that way? And then what did they do? And this is very typical. They go to the doctor. What's wrong with me? How come I don't experience this? How come I don't feel this? And traditional doctors are yet to be, and I say that carefully because I really hope it will change, but are yet to be trained in this holistic understanding that there may be things that happen in our lives that cause us to either disconnect from our body. So we're not experiencing our body the way somebody who hasn't disconnected does, and can also cause so much inflammation in the body, right? Because maybe you're overconnected and you're feeling these sensations, and there are still parts of you that are running with this hypervigilance, which would make so much sense, that you're producing so much extra chemical in your body, which is what happened to me, where I ended up with so much inflammation in my joints and in my tissue that I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, my numbers were off the charts. Right. But everybody in my family is going, I don't understand. Like, nobody else has rheumatoid arthritis. And it wasn't until I said to my mom, well, there's this study called ACEs. And according to the ACEs study, my score is a 5. I had a pretty high likelihood of developing some sort of condition that was going to be very inflammatory in nature, so much so that it literally would change my body at the cellular level, and it would show up on a blood test. Right? So unless you're in the know and you know that that can happen, because how many times have I heard somebody say, well, it's not from that. I mean, it's on my tests. I mean, my tests showed. I'm like, yeah, because your body can change at a cellular level. This is another one of these after effects of trauma. Right? So people will say, I don't understand how I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's or with lupus or with rheumatoid arthritis or with any Sjogren's, any of these autoimmunes, or sometimes I've even heard rare conditions, 60 years old, I just got diagnosed with this rare condition that only 4-year-olds get. I'm like, well, tell me what your life was like at 4 years old. And then you find out there was this traumatic experience trapped in the body, right? This body keeps the score. So I'm so glad we're discussing it, because this is the purpose of this podcast. These are the things I want listeners to hear. This isn't even really discussed so much in traditional therapy per se, where you could be in therapy. You had this experience. Right. But yet you're stuck in your life because certain things haven't been resolved. And there's just other things you can be looking at and other lenses you can be looking through. And that's kind of the goal here, is to widen choices and understanding for people, right? So you have this outer body experience at 40. And what was that experience? Did you get full? Did you recognize something that you didn't realize wasn't normal at the time?
For me, what happened is I experienced the first step for me was that I experienced hunger for the first time, because I really started changing my mindset into I'm going to eat when my body's telling me that I need to eat, which was kind of a joke at first because my body wasn't telling me anything. My body was numb and empty. So learning to know what emptiness and what hunger felt like, and pairing that with eating something. And so that for me was the first clue that, like, okay, so now I know what it feels like to have some food. I'm going to first fill my body with things that I know that I need, and stop when I have what I need. And so those were the first experiences for me on that journey. And from there, I began feeling things like different kinds of food would give me different levels of energy, or different, like I might have some minor food allergies or some reactions to certain things, or certain, like sugar would make me sluggish and give me headaches, and things that I just was putting it in. And so it was a very gradual kind of thing. And from that, you learn to experience other things. You learn to experience touch in a different way, which was quite frightening at first, because not being touched was another protective kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when you begin to be able to feel touch in an intimate way, that opens up a whole other dimension of intimacy and relationship and connection. So it was a journey, and it was slow. It started with just recognizing my relationship with food.
So important. So if someone's listening today and they feel a deep connection to your story, what services do you provide that someone could maybe learn how to start on their own journey?
I do one-to-one individual trauma recovery coaching, and I do offer those services. I do also do some mental health education, but I feel like for someone who's really kind of deep in the trenches where I have been, that one-on-one would be the way to go. And so I am accepting new clients. I do one-on-one coaching, and I specialize in people who've had sexual trauma.
Yeah. How would you like to end today's interview? What is it that you feel maybe we didn't get a chance to cover that you would love someone to know from your heart?
I think the most important thing, the thing that drives me the most in all of this, is that the numbers are huge. They're scary on how many people are going through these things, but that perhaps we can flip that perspective and look through the lens of, if there are this many people going through this, then that logically means I'm not alone, and that you're never alone, and that there's so many people out here who've had the same experience, and that reaching out for help is so critical. And even if you don't know what that help would look like, or you don't know what you would talk about, just to know that there are people in the world. And I would really encourage someone to find someone heavily trained in trauma, and then just to believe yourself, just to know that predators, the environment, these reactions, your inner critic, all these things, they deceive you. And to know that your truth really lives within you, and to just know that truth and trust and stand in it.
Oh my gosh. Do you see this little pink sign behind me?
I can't read it.
I created it I know you can't read it. It's pretty far away, but I created it quite a while back because it was something I was saying to a lot of my clients on a very frequent basis. And it says, know your truth and trust your knowing.
I like that. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the biggest thing here. You do know your truth. You have to trust your gut. Absolutely. You know, and it's okay to trust your gut, and it's okay to go somebody and ask for help, or to say, I have something I need to share. And the equally important statement, which I need to create a sign for, is you don't need other people's validation of your story in order for it to have been true.
Exactly.
You just don't. If it's your truth, then it's true to you, and your body's responding in kind to that, and your mind is responding in kind to that. And it's very human for us to seek validation and get back up, especially when we think we're, I'm going to put in quotes, crazy, because this is the term we were using earlier. You know your truth, trust it. And if you're not getting validation from others, stop trying. Right? Resolve in yourself and reach out to somebody like Alinda. Let me just share with people how people can find you. And this will also be in the show notes. So Alinda is Alinda Quinn, and her website is Sacred Space Trauma Recovery. Anyone who contacts her and mentions this podcast will get a 10% discount on their first months of coaching sessions. You can also check her out on TikTok at Alinda Quinn, at Instagram at Sacred Space Trauma. And I just want to thank you so much for being so brave and so courageous and so amazing in sharing this, because this is a taboo topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about. And it's really time that people start stepping out of the shadows of shame and realizing that it wasn't them and that it's okay to share. And it's a good part of the healing step of the journey.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for having me
Thank
here
you so
and
much.
giving me this space. And I just want to wish everyone out there the very best and I hope and prayers for healing.
Amazing. If you guys like this episode, there are a lot of episodes just like it on my YouTube channel and on my podcast channel. It's called Flip That Shit. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to see the video version of that, you just go over to YouTube and you look for Flip That Mindset, and remember to subscribe. That way you'll always be notified when new episodes are dropped. Again, Alinda, thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great day.
My pleasure. Thank you.